On today's show, a draft lottery special. We now know the draft order at the top end of the first round, and today we'll be diving into all the options that those teams have in those slots.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we have a very fun update for the draft. In case you missed it, the NHL Draft Lottery is now behind us. We know which team is picking first overall, jumping massively 9 slots in the draft order, as well as a team jumping all the way from 14th to 4th overall in the order. So a lot of drama at this draft lottery, a lot of teams jumping massively in the order, and also a very interesting draft class to kind of be picking in this top 1, top 4 range, because there's potentially a lot of movement in this top end of the draft, and these teams picking where they are may very well change what ends up happening here at the top end of the draft. So a lot of exciting things for us to delve into here today. We'll be talking about the New York Islanders, the San Jose Sharks, the Chicago Blackhawks, and Utah Hockey Club in the first segment with the top 4 picks. Then moving on the second segment with picks 5 through 10. And in the third, we'll be wrapping up the show with picks 11 through 17 because the Montreal Canadiens have back-to-back picks at 16th and 17th overall. And I think that one pick is very much going to influence the other. But before we dive into everything today, this episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to amazon.com/firetv locked on to learn more. So let's dive right into this because there is so much to talk about. And I'd be very curious to hear about all of you fans that are watching this episode, especially if you're on YouTube. Leave me a comment down below. How was your impression of the whole draft lottery process of seeing the live balls kind of jumping out of the little machine in live time, which is the first time it's ever happened? And if you did tune in, did you find it as boring as I did? I mean, like taking an ad break after before the final ball for the first overall pick, I thought was a little bit of an ill taste, but still at the same time, it was interesting to kind of follow along in real time. But I did find past years of where the lottery was actually done previously, but it was then just presented to the public, being a lot more entertaining, kind of going from 16th overall all the way up to 1 and kind of like moving up that draft order rather than going the other way and starting off with first overall. It's kind of like, oh, the big thing here has already happened 5 minutes in, and now we're moving on to the second overall lottery, and then it's kind of over. I thought it was a lot less entertaining, but interesting to kind of see how the process is done in real time, I guess. But personally, I never had many concerns about there being like rigging in draft lotteries to make it go to one team. So it being live is interesting, but I don't think it really changed all that much from my perspective. But let's talk a little bit here about the first overall selection, because we have the New York Islanders moving up massively to first overall. I think they were slotted at 10th. So they moved up 9 slots all the way up to 1. And you just saw the massive smile plastered onto the face of the director of pro scouting there with the New York Islanders, who also won a cup there in the Mike Bossy years, and just complete shock. There's absolutely no expectation of this happening, but I'm quite happy for New York Islanders fans because for the last 10, 15 years, there's just been a lot of middling results there coming from Long Island, and adding in a player who could be an absolute game changer here at first overall, I think is fascinating. And of course, you have then the San Jose Sharks and Chicago Blackhawks and Utah Hockey Club wrapping out the top 4, and Utah moved up from 14th. So you had some massive movements here in the lottery, which was very unlike last year where you had literally no shifts whatsoever. And then this year you have a result where all but 2 teams in the top 16 ended up in a slot different than where they were projected to going, because again, the 14th overall seed moved up all the way to 4th. So there's just a lot of movement here. And that's very interesting to me as a scout. And like you're seeing a lot of like the mock drafts, I think, that are going to look very different now than they were projected to being earlier, because you have completely different teams picking here in the top 5. So let's talk a little bit about the draft options here. And we'll be doing a rundown here for all 16 teams here that were involved in the lottery, and talk a bit about the options available at those slots, as well as the needs, the organizational needs, and whether or not a team is even going to go by need, or if they're just going to go for the best player available no matter what. So at first overall, of course, we have the New York Islanders, and Matthew Schaefer is the likely candidate to go here, but the Isles have many options, including a hometown kid with James Higgins, who grew up on Long Island and was the projected first overall pick coming into this draft season. So still definitely a possibility of him going that high up at number 1, especially as a homegrown talent, and guy who broke the record all time for the most production at a U18 World Championships. And he did that last year, a year ago, when he was still like 16 years old, I believe, or maybe he was just recently turned 17. But overall, like Higgins and Schaefer and Michael Misa give 3 really interesting options here at first overall for the Islanders. And another option that is probably going to be talked about a little bit here in the coming weeks and months, the potential for trading this pick. This is not a year where there is a slam dunk first overall pick. I think there's a lot of options here at the high end of the draft. I have 2 players that are quite clearly my top 2, with Michael Misa and Matthew Schaefer, but they've been kind of head and head all season long and going between each other. So I think that between 1 and 2, you have a lot of just like you can't really go wrong in either slot. So the San Jose Sharks falling from 1st to 2nd, I think totally fine, and still opens up the chance for them moving up in the lottery next year, when the big prize is going to be Gavin McKenna, which is certainly a higher end talent than is available in this year's draft class. So selecting at number 2, I think, is really solid for the San Jose Sharks, where sure, you're falling down a slot, but only 1 player is going to be taken off the board, and you can have your pick of the litter beyond that. And I don't think there's the biggest gap between 1 and 2 this season. But beyond that, with the New York Islanders, I'd love to hear from you down below. Who is the best fit among players? Like, of course, you have like the prospective number 1 with Matthew Schaefer and the local kid with James Higgins. But maybe Michael Misa is the guy as the solidifying 1C. Maybe that's what they're eyeing the most here among what they need in their organization. I'd love to hear from you down below who the favorite is to go here at number 1. But moving on to 2nd overall with the San Jose Sharks, whoever's available between Matthew Schaefer and Michael Misa is a fantastic pick here at 2nd overall. I don't think that Mike Greer and co can really go wrong between either of those options. Whoever falls to them, I think they should be very, very happy with. But there's also a possibility of them going another route, and that would be a player like Porter Martone, perhaps at 2nd overall, if they want to add some size, some power, some creativity and skill from the wing. He's a really interesting piece there, but he might be an even better fit at number 3, because the Chicago Blackhawks are picking 3rd overall. And of course, if a guy like Michael Misa is available here, and you can pair a center like pairing down the road with Connor Bedard and Michael Misa, you are spoiled for choice, and also have some nice variety there, where Misa also has a high-end shot. It's not as good as Bedard's, but he's a very versatile offensive player, but can bring some two-way intensity, just high-end intelligence, great playmaking. He's, I think, a very good complement for a player like Connor Bedard to either play as like your elite winger on a first line who can play down the middle whenever you need him to, or be like your absolute luxury 2C who plays more in a 1A, 1B kind of situation and probably plays more matchup minutes than Connor Bedard does. I think he'd be a great fit in Chicago if he's available, but that might be a very big if. Beyond that, I think that Chicago might be eyeing some size and reliability here on draft day in terms of the first pick in here at 3rd overall, because we've seen from recent selections, of course, we have guys like Connor Bedard and Artem Levshinov. You have like your kind of like 1C and 1 right D, at least in, like if you're the Blackhawks are hoping those guys fill those slots. You have those kind of locked down now in terms of like your draft investments here in recent seasons. But Beyond that, Porter Martone, I think, would be a really, really good complement there in the top six because you have a lot of skill and speed and undersized guys that are playing at forward higher up in the Chicago Blackhawks lineup, as well as the prospects that are still coming in the door. Talking about guys like Nick Lardis and Oliver Moore and Frank Nazar. You have a lot of skill and speed and scoring danger and playmaking skill in there, but there just isn't that power forward mold or big physical play that can create space and time for those smaller, niftier forwards. And I think that Martone would be a very interesting player. He doesn't really play that power forward game just yet, but he has all the tools necessary to kind of grow into it longer term. So I think he'd be a very good fit in Chicago. But I think that size and reliability are also just the things that Chicago is going to be vying. So both Anton Frondel and Caleb Desnoyers are going to be really active options here at third overall. And we saw last year the Blackhawks did not hesitate to kind of reach slightly on a player that they thought was just a perfect fit for their organization with Lev Shinov, both on a personal and professional standpoint. And I think that might be a similar thing here this season, where you see them going for a guy like Desnoyers or Frondel at third overall, even though the upside maybe isn't quite at the same echelon as other players available in this range, but it would just fit in seamlessly to what Chicago's building. And with both those players, are getting a physical, centerman with some offensive skill. With Frondel, it's a wicked shot. With Desnoyers, it's some really strong playmaking flashes. And you also get real defensive reliability. And that's something I think that Chicago's going to be really looking for, because you have players like Oliver Moore who are quite solid defensively, work very hard. I think Moore probably ends up playing on the wing if you end up taking a swing on a guy like a Frondel or a Desnoyers. But I think there's a lot of options here for the Blackhawks, and moving up as well is going to be an option, because if the Islanders decide to kind of shop that pick, maybe they're eyeing James Higgins, who's likely going to be available at third overall. That kind of trade could make a lot of sense to me, because I think the Blackhawks would absolutely love adding a player like Matthew Schaefer into the equation, and that could be something as well to keep an eye on. So a lot of potential movement as well, I think, in terms of trading and that shifting the draft order now as we move closer to draft day. But to wrap up the first segment here, we have the Utah Hockey Club moving up from 14th to 4th overall. They've been picking in this top 5, top 6 range repeatedly here in recent seasons. And I think that there's a lot of options here on draft day for Utah, because this is a team that has spent a lot of draft capital on big, sizable players in recent seasons. But if you're picking here at 4th overall, you're going to have an option of a guy like James Higgins likely available, or quite possibly available in this range. But they already have a selection of undersized, talented forwards in their top 6, right? Whether it be Logan Cooley, whether it be like Clayton Keller or Dylan Gunther. None of these guys really bring all that much physicality, and they're certainly not power forwards. So there's a bit of a gap there, I think, in terms of the top 6 skill. And this is, I think, the draft where Utah's really going to look to fill that. We've seen them take big swings on big boys as well in recent seasons, right? Whether it be guys like Daniil Boot and Maverick Lamoureux, just really big bodies. Lamoureux's a defenseman, but still going for size. There was one draft, I think it was 2023, where like all but one player that they drafted on that day, which was like I think 12 players, was like over 6'2". So there's a team that really values that size and could still use a little bit more of it in their top 6. So going for a guy like Porter Martone or Anton Frondel, or even taking a big boy swing on Roger McQueen, considering that here, look, you're moving up 10 slots. It's found money when you're picking at 4th overall, when you were slotted at 14th with how you performed in the regular season, really pushing for the playoffs. Why not just swing for the fences on a massive skilled forward who can play at center or at right wing, like Roger McQueen, who just has so much potential, so much upside. I think that could make sense, and he brings that size, he brings that skill. But I think that if Porter Martone is available at 4th overall, that's going to be a pretty simple selection here for the Utah Hockey Club. He just checks every box that they're looking for. He's going to add playmaking and physicality and just anger and viciousness as well. Like, he's a guy that has taken quite a few game misconducts this season. When he gets frustrated, he has to kind of maybe tame himself down a little bit more and learn to be a bit more composed in high pressure situations to not take those penalties. But still, this is a guy with a lot of physical runway. So a player that I think that Utah would really be interested in here at 4th overall. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we'll be talking about picks 5 through 10, which belong to Nashville, Philadelphia, Boston, Seattle, Buffalo, and Anaheim. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Did you know that your Fire TV stick is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 2025 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed. As easily as you stream your favorite shows, it's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and far more. Play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. And if you already have a console, a Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take your or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Generation. All right, let's keep this episode rolling, talking about the draft lottery here and moving on to the teams that are going to be selecting between 5th and 10th overall. Of course, this is still subject to change down the road because trades might happen. We don't know what's going to happen there on draft day, especially. But as things stand, these are the teams selecting here. So 5th overall, we have the Nashville Predators falling 2 slots because both the Islanders and Utah just leapt over pretty much everyone in this glut of teams to select top 4. But Nashville is still going to have an opportunity to select a fantastic player, I believe, in this range. If James Higgins falls to this area of the draft, and that could happen as well if, like, Utah, for instance, were to swing on a big right shot defenseman like Radi Mrtka. You might see a really high skill player that's been talked about in the top 3, top 4 range all year long, slip to 5th or 6th overall. And anyone that kind of falls, I think, should be the main target here for the Nashville Predators because there is so much depth of skill in this prospect pool. There's so much quantity. What they require, what they need desperately is elite level skill, game breaking ability. And there might be some options here around this range. Higgins and Martone, I think, may well be available around here. Like, we'll see how things shake out on draft day. But one of those 2 players being available, I think, is more than conceivable for the Predators. And if they are, that's the player to take a swing on, in my opinion, because they bring that just game breaking potential and upside. And at 5th overall, you can't really hope to do all that much better than that this season, in my opinion. But beyond that, I think Radi Mrtka as well would be an interesting option. A massive 6'6" right shot defenseman who skates very smoothly, very, very effective play killer, rush defending, very controlled, very intelligent in his defensive implications, and also has some like untouched offensive potential, in my opinion. There's quite a decent amount of skill in this player's toolkit, and he was showing that a lot more when he made the switch over to the WHL with the Seattle Thunderbirds. He's a decent option here as well at 5th overall. But moving on to number 6, we have the Philadelphia Flyers, who I think are going to really go for another centerman. And one player I think may well rise up on draft day. And this is kind of talking if guys like Frondell and Desnoyers are off the board, and like those kind of like top 2 like centers beyond the top 3 picks are still available here. I think that those 2 are great picks here for Philadelphia, of course. But if they're off the board, Brady Martin, I think, is a name to follow. He is likely going to be the biggest riser from the U18 World Championships, a player who plays with viciousness, is an incredibly hard hitter, very middle driven, and incredibly skilled and creative. That's a combination that teams are really, really, really going to like, especially right now, when we have playoff hockey in the NHL in front of us night in, night out, where that combination of physicality, middle drive, and skill just kills teams repeatedly at this level. I think that Martin would be a great fit in Philadelphia or in Boston at number 7. I think both Philadelphia and Boston might maybe targeting some similar types of players. Philadelphia, I think, really should be going for a pivot, so for a centerman. And the main guys there, again, are Desnoyers, Frondel, and Brady Martin. But for Boston, you have a lot more choice because this is not a team with a very deep prospect pool by any stretch of the imagination. They are entering a rebuild as we stand, and they could use to improve pretty much any area of their lineup. But I think players like Brady Martin, Caleb Desnoyers, and even Roger McQueen, which would be a really big swing because he's barely played this season, but still the skill is really, really evident and has massive upside. I think those are great options here for the Boston Bruins, who always love their heavy hitting, skilled, big guys at forward. And I think that if you're picking in this range of the draft, that's kind of the mold that you have the most selection of. So that's kind of, I think the Bruins are going to be doing here at 7th overall. And even though they're falling 2 slots here on draft day, in the top 10, this is not the year I think that where there are a bunch of skill cutoffs in the top 10, top 15 range of the draft. There's a pretty clear one, I think, around like maybe 3rd or 4th overall. Like I really, really like my top 2 players in this draft being Schaefer and Misa has really been entrenched. But then you have a pretty big tier between like 3rd and 10th overall or so, where you can pretty much go interchangeably with a lot of these players depending what you're valuing. So this is kind of a year where if you're if you're falling 2 slots, it's unfortunate. You're going to get a little bit less options, but it's far from the end of the world. You're still going to get players in the same tier of skill and upside as you would have had at 5th overall. So Boston Bruins fans, I think that you're pretty okay here with where you're picking. At 8th overall, we have the Seattle Kraken. Again, falling 2 slots here, but they have a lot of options too. I think Victor Eklund would be a fantastic option here for the Kraken, who brings just a lot of grit and intensity from the wing. Beyond that, you can go with a guy like Jake O'Brien if they want to go down the middle with a centerman who's a high-end playmaker, or even you can go with guys like Lyndon Lakovic and Roger McQueen if Seattle wants to add some more size at forward. I'm very curious to see if they're going to break their trend of selecting only forwards in the first round. The Seattle Kraken have yet to select a single defenseman on day 1 of the draft. If you're picking around this range, that might change. If a guy like Rodney Murchka is available, if a guy like maybe Jackson Smith or Logan Hensler has really just been the guy for your scouting staff all year long, I think this is the perfectly fine range for those players. But again, you do have some of those higher end skill guys at forward that are likely still going to be available here at 8th overall. So very curious to see what Seattle does at the draft this year after picking Berkeley Catton in the first round last season. Moving on, we have the Buffalo Sabres at 9th overall, and I'm really hoping they don't go again for a middle 6 center. They've been picking that mold repeatedly here in recent seasons, like last year going for Consta Helenius, a player I like a lot, but did not like fit in Buffalo because there's so much of a logjam in terms of 5'11 to 6'1, two-way, hardworking, intelligent centers that just lack the high-end elite level skill to break games open. So I think this year Buffalo has to kind of change their approach. And there's going to be multiple different pathways to doing that. You could either go for a guy like Victor Eklund, like I mentioned for Seattle, who just drives the pace, is a real offensive driver, very middle driven. If you want to pair him with Zach Benson, you have 2 wrecking balls, undersized wrecking balls on the line, which would be very fun. But I have an inkling that Buffalo might be looking to add a little bit more size. This was kind of their off-season plan last season, in 2024, was to add a bit more grit and physicality to their lineup to try to really contend for the playoffs. And it didn't really work, unfortunately, for them this season. They had some injuries as well, but still, things could have looked a lot better for the Sabres this year. But I think a guy like Keishon Aitchison would kind of be along those lines. He's a left shot defenseman, which of course the Sabres have in abundance, but he's so physical. He has a wicked shot. He can play on his offside on the right. And if they want to go for a righty, I think Logan Hensler is the guy. He's just so solid, incredibly mobile, doesn't bring that same physicality, but brings a lot of puck moving skill and would, I think, not compliment, but he would fit into how Buffalo plays from the back end in the breakout really, really nicely alongside guys like Dahlin and Owen Power and Bowen Byram. But to finish off the second segment, we have the Anaheim Ducks selecting at 10th overall. And again, you have quite a couple options here. I am curious to see what Anaheim does. They could go defense, but there's so much quality on the blue line coming in and right now for the Anaheim Ducks that I expect it to be a forward likely here on draft day at 10th overall. And if William Eklund's available, I think he's right up their alley. He plays the game of hockey the way that Anaheim wants to build their team around. So he's a really interesting choice. But Brady Martin, if he's available, don't be shocked if Brady Martin rises his stock all the way to being picked at like 6th or 7th overall and isn't even available here at 10th. But if he is, I think he's also a really good fit in Anaheim to kind of bring that combination of skill and physicality that they've been trying to build throughout their lineup. Whether you're talking about guys like Leo Carlson or Mason McTavish or Cutter Gauthier, or Beckett Seneca, of course, too. There's so many players that have been brought into the fold quite recently with Anaheim that reflect Pat Verbeek's like management style and what he's vying to kind of build this team around. I think that Brady Martin fits in wonderfully in terms of adding to that and kind of falling into like that second line capacity longer term. He has a lot of skill. Very, very physical, as I mentioned too, and he was just absolutely electric here at the U18 World Championships for Team Canada. And Jake O'Brien, if he's available still around this range, he has a playmaking skill that I think would fit in nicely with what Anaheim's been hoarding recently as well, but maybe they want to go for a bit more of a shoot-first player here. I'd be curious to see what they end up doing on draft day, but that wraps up the second segment here for us. In the next one, we'll be wrapping up the show with picks 11 through 17, which is the Pittsburgh Penguins, the New York Rangers, Detroit Red Wings, Columbus Blue Jackets, Vancouver Canucks, and the Montreal Canadiens going back-to-back at 16 and 17. But before we dive into all of that, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you've never been able to catch a live NHL playoff game, it's unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it's next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever before. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as you get closer to puck drop, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%. Their all-in pricing shows you the total cost up front, so there's never any surprise fees at checkout. And the app even shows you panoramic seat reviews so that you know exactly what you're getting before you commit to the purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, talking about the final 7 teams here, the final 6 teams, to wrap up the show between 11th and 17th overall. At number 11, the Pittsburgh Penguins fall one slot, and they, again, kind of like the Boston Bruins, just need skill. They need, ideally, game-breaking skill, and they were just one ball away from winning the lottery all the way up to number 1, as the New York Islanders did. It was between those two to make that big leap, who both had 2 balls left with the final ball in terms of having chances to move up. So a bit of a painful miss there for Kyle Dubas and for Pittsburgh Penguins fans as a whole. But still, there's going to be a lot of talent available here at 11th overall. And this is higher than the Pittsburgh Penguins have picked in quite a long time. So going to be interesting to see what they're going to be using their draft pick on. But I think if you want to go on tools, if you want to go on upside, if you want to go on just top 4 left shot defenseman who has all the tools in the world and could develop into a real first pairing guy down the road if you really get lucky and a lot of the mental warts are kind of ironed out, Jackson Smith would be a fantastic selection here, I think, for the Penguins. He's an elite level skater. He's so physical, an amazing rush defender, and he's been showing increasing amounts offensive flashes as progressed. He scored 9 goals in his last 11 WHL regular season games, and that was after having scored, I believe, 0 goals before then. So he went from literally 0 to 100 in terms of goal scoring this season down the stretch. And he's a player that brings all of these tools, but things still have to coalesce into a more cohesive package. So the decision-making, the intelligence, these things are a little bit more inconsistent with him, but he's an 18-year-old hockey player. These things are going to need some time to develop, but still something to keep an eye on, but a really good option here for the Penguins. And if they were going for upside, guys like Justin Carbonneau, Lyndon Lakovic, and Jake O'Brien, if he's available at 11th overall, I think would also be really interesting selections here for Pittsburgh, who just need that skill. At number 12, we have the New York Rangers, who surprisingly missed the playoffs here this season. And I wouldn't be shocked for them to go for a more projectable, maybe less lengthy development time kind of player. And guys along those lines would be Malcolm Spence, really like solid middle 6 projection. He works quite hard, has a good shot, can do a bit of everything in the offensive zone. Is just a good complementary guy for your middle 6 down the road, and could be playing NHL minutes in like 2 years' time. But beyond him, you also have guys like Brady Martin, if he's available. Again, I think that the Rangers would love what he brings in terms of the physicality and mixing that in with a lot of skill as well. And after that, you also have Logan Hensler and Tayshaun Aitchison. If they want to go improve the blue line, if they want to go for the right side, I think Hensler makes sense, but there's also some quality down the right there in with the Rangers. But the left shot defense has gotten a little bit weaker here, so maybe a guy like Tayshaun Aitchison, who brings that just rampant physicality, is going to be an interesting option as well for the Rangers. But at number 14, we have the Detroit Red Wings, who, just like the Buffalo Sabres, just been taking their swings on middle 6 forward projections here in recent seasons at the high end in the first round. And I'd love for them to just take a big swing on upside here this season. Justin Carbonneau would kind of come to mind, a guy that can break games open with high-end handling, great skating ability, can be physical when he's actually moving his feet and working hard, which is inconsistent. But with these high-skill players of the QMJHL, that's kind of the standard here. But Caleb Dinwiddie is very much an exception there for QMJHL, like first-round talents. But beyond that, you also have guys like Lyndon Lakovic, who is a big man, but has just so much soft skill. And the main criticism is that he doesn't use his body enough, but he's a soft skill player at his core. Imagine he were like 5'11" instead, and I think that the skill would just be so much more at the forefront, and where there weren't that expectation for him to be a true power forward, because it just isn't his game. But I think he's likely going to be available around this range at 13th overall, and he'd be a player that has like significant top 6 potential for the Detroit Red Wings, who would just make a lot of sense, I think, for this team. But if they stick with what they're typically selecting with Yzerman, what Yzerman has been really using his draft picks on in this range for the last like seemingly 5 or 6 years, is just a reliable piece. And that would be a guy like Malcolm Spence, if he's still available in this range. If he doesn't go to a team like the Rangers, I think that he would make sense for Detroit for what they've been valuing here recently. But moving on to 14th overall, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets. And I think the Blue Jackets are going to be eyeing to kind of solidifying the right side of defense, because you have a lot of question marks there. You have players that aren't going to be under contract for all that much longer, whether it be a player like Ivan Provorov. And of course, he traded away David Jiricek as well earlier in the season. So there's a bit of a void down the right side of defense among blue liners who can eat those top 4 minutes down the road. And I think that's a real area that they need to improve. So I would not at all be shocked to see them targeting a player like Logan Hensler if he's available. He might go higher, of course, than this, but if he's still on the board, I think he'd be a good fit in Columbus. Blake Fiddler, if he's not, Fiddler is almost certainly going to be available here at 14th overall, is likely going to go lower than this, but I could see a team that has a need for a right-side defenseman taking that swing a bit earlier. There's a lot of inconsistency in the reads with Blake Fiddler, but he's a great rush defender. He's very mobile. He's very physical. He's 6'4", young for the draft class, has still some growing room in terms of exploring the offensive game. So a lot to look forward to in terms of the possibilities with that player, but it's a lot less projectable than a guy like Logan Hensler is. So we'll see what happens there for the Columbus Blue Jackets. But moving on to 15th overall, we have the Vancouver Canucks. And there are quite a few holes in Vancouver's lineup and in their prospect pool that they could fill. And they might just go for a player that has a bit of a hot hand, a player who's on the rise, who kind of has that trajectory moving skywards in terms of how their development is going. So a couple options along those lines would be Jackson Smith, especially if there's fear that Quinn Hughes leaves in the offseason. You're going to want to solidify that left side of defense sooner rather than later. And Smith would bring a lot of tools to the equation. That could be very interesting for the Canucks. Beyond that, Carter Bear as a WHLer with a ridiculous amount of playmaking skill and who's just like the most vicious and hardworking player in the entire league this season. And beyond that, maybe in terms of a late season riser who just had a wicked performance at the U18 Worlds, Sasha Boumedienne of Team Sweden, who I believe finished like 5th or 6th in terms of all-time defenseman scoring at the tournament. He's a guy that really showed the offense in his game that wasn't fully on display at Boston University and has improved his skating from like a well below average to above average level in the course of like 8 months, which has been absolutely ridiculous to track here this season. So there are a lot of question marks around that mobility earlier in the season, and that just isn't the concern anymore. And Vancouver, of course, loves picking and acquiring their Swedish players. So I think he'd be an interesting fit. But let's wrap up the show here at 16th overall and 17th overall, because these two picks are held by the same team and a team that may very well be trading them to go acquire either a top 4 right shot defenseman or a number 2 center closer to the draft. And that's the Montreal Canadiens. The 16th overall pick was acquired from the Calgary Flames in that Sean Monahan deal in 2022 when Montreal acquired that contract when it was seen as dead weight. And then later on, of course, also flipped Sean Monahan to the Winnipeg Jets for a first-round selection. But they already used that pick last year to trade up for Michael Page. And this year they have the other pick, the one they got first from the Calgary Flames, and came with an absolute like Bible of conditions. But this is the pick. This is the pick it's ended up being 16th overall in the 2025 NHL draft. And the Habs are going to be eyeing, if they keep these picks, 1 center and 1 right shot defenseman, if those like positions are like have good options to them. I think that's kind of what the Habs need the most here at this point, but they also have the luxury of just having so much talent in their system, top to bottom, that they can just go for any faller who's available that they just didn't expect to be available there in these slots. So if like Logan Hensler falls to 16th overall, which I'd be surprised by because he's likely going to be the second right shot defenseman selected on draft day, and right Ds don't usually fall all that far. But if Hensler does make 6th overall, he's a player whose like trajectory absolutely going way up. Was way better late in the season for Johnson earlier in the year, was driving offense, using his mobility on both sides of the puck to kill plays and move the puck up the ice with control. He'd be a great fit with the Habs and what they need in their top 4, and could be a good complement for a player like Lane Hudson down the road. But beyond that, I think that the Habs would really like to bring in a lot of skill. And if they don't go center or right D, I think that they're going just elite level skill, and a player who fits that bill is local, and they would have gotten a lot of viewings on him because he plays in Blainville-Boisbriand, just north of Montreal. And that's Justin Carbonneau from the Armada, who's a lot of things to iron out in his game in terms of, I think there's a bit of attitude in terms of like just demanding the puck constantly, whacking his stick on the ice. He seems to annoy his line mates quite often with that kind of behavior. And beyond that, just making some immature decisions on puck. But overall, the upside here as a top 6 dynamo who can just break a game open with his skill, that's something the Habs just won't be able to look away from, I think, if he's available in this range. But if you want to go for that intensity of Brendan Gallagher air long-term, Carter Bear, who's going to be falling a little bit because of that lacerated Achilles injury, is going to be an interesting target. And this is likely not happening now after this fantastic U18 performance. But if Brady Martin somehow makes it to 16th overall, I think the Habs are swiping him up immediately. He fits the bill perfectly in terms of bringing top 6 level skill alongside of that physicality that is just absolutely rampant in his game, and a lot of room to grow as well in terms of the efficacy of his skills and dangling implications in the offensive zone. He was kind of trying everything this season with the Sioux Greyhounds. He had a long leash, but he's going to be a guy that's going to get a lot more projectable in his offense, I think, in the coming 2 seasons. But at 17th overall, you have another bunch of options here from Montreal. So just to list off a couple guys, Blake Fiddler, if Logan Hensler isn't available, there's your mobile right shot defenseman. If you want to go for a massive power forward that you think has like a little bit of top 6 upside. Václav Nestoshil from the Muskegon Lumberjacks in the USHL, who I absolutely love, I think could be an interesting option if the Habs want to reach a little bit on a guy that just has a lot of skill and hard physical tools. Jackson Smith, if he falls to 17th overall, doesn't matter. He's a left shot defenseman. He brings everything the Habs want on the defensive end in terms of physicality, mobility, being excellent in terms of the breakout, getting pucks out of the zone with control and killing plays constantly against the rush. He'd be a great fit as well. And 2 last options, Benjamin Kindle, who grew up a Habs fan and is just a very skilled player, great playmaker, very methodical thinker of the game. And last but not least, from the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies, we have Bill Zonin, a centerman who transitioned from the wing just this season, but is a big body, good playmaker around the net front. He's a guy that I think that the Habs could really quite like as a potential like middle 6 center down the road. But that wraps up all of these picks here for the lottery results, plus 1 bonus there at 17th overall with the Habs. But I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I would love to hear from you down below in the comments. What are your takeaways from this draft order? What was the most shocking thing here in terms of moving up? Was it Utah? Was it the Islanders? I'd love to hear from you down below. And who do you think that your favorite team is going to be selecting here on draft day now that we have a more crystallized view of what the order is going to be? That wraps things up here for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I hope to catch you tuning in again very, very soon.